was that Hardie had a strong set of values which weren't just abstract, they were real in the lives of the communities that he sought to represent, and then he tried to embed those values in the organisation that we developed. Now, in that understanding lay Hardie's biggest decision, his biggest political decision, which was to reject incorporation into the Liberal Party and seek an independent Labour movement based on our values and our practices. Now, why did he refuse an alliance with the Liberals? It was not, repeat, not because he rejected the great causes of liberty, of freedom of the individual, but instead because he considered it vital that when the national interest is considered, the interests of working people are considered to be part of that, so that those who were then exploited and excluded could take their rightful place in the politics of our country and in the governance of our nation. Hardie said repeatedly that although there were many things that we can agree on with Liberals, when it came to the conflict between capital and labour, between the banks and the real economy, they would always side with the Conservatives. He didn't have a crystal ball that could look forward 110 years, but he would have predicted that Mr. Clegg would be busy defending a Conservative budget over 100 years after he was elected as MP for Merthyr Tydfil and Aberdare. We need to retain a strong connection with that tradition of social liberalism that recognises that liberty and solidarity are two sides of the same coin, while being vigilant in opposing, I think it was because I mentioned Mr. Clegg, we need to retain that strong connection with the tradition of social liberalism that recognises liberty and solidarity are two sides of the same coin, while being vigilant in opposing that economic liberalism that rules the world in the interests of the richest. Hardie was put under huge pressure to merge with the Liberal Party, but he resolutely pursued and established the integrity of the Labour interest. And we're reminded now how right he was in that. Here, in this place that Hardie represented, was the cradle of a beautiful and strong child, the Labour Party. And it's achieved unique and great things. The extension of the vote, rights for women, the raising of the school leaving age, the National Health Service, decolonisation, the foundation of the United Nations, the Green Belt, and in our own time, the minimum wage, equal rights, devolution to Scotland and Wales, resolution in Northern Ireland. Great things. We were never a revolutionary or violent party. We've always pursued the common good and were prepared to compromise, but in order to compromise, you have to be organised, and you have to know your interests. To act together, sure in the belief that human beings and nature are not commodities to be bought and sold at the best price. Neither are we units of provision to be effectively administered by the state. The Labour Party alone understood the peril posed to working people of our country by an unregulated market and by an interfering state, a system which banned trade unions with the one hand and imposed the poor laws with the other. Both are wrong. Hardie was a socialist, not a statist. The Independent Labour Party was self-organised. It brought together the co-ops, the building societies, the trade unions, all shades of faith communities, into a broad-based alliance for the common good. And in that, I think we should be inspired by Hardie's example. I don't wish simply to be leader of the Labour Party. I seek to renew the Labour movement in idea and in organisation, building relationships and a common life through common action for the common good in communities right around the country. And that's why part of my leadership campaign is not actually about seeking votes. It's about training 1,000 community organisers, community leaders around the country, whether they vote for me or not. Hardie helped build, and by the way, if we can train 1,000 community organisers in 3 months of an election, a leadership campaign, what can we do in 3 or 4 years before a general election? A lot. Hardie helped to build a transformational movement in very, very hard times. And we need to reconnect with that mission and recognise the importance of a labour tradition as a means through which we protect each other from the market storms that are once more upon us. For that, we have to relearn the lessons that Hardie taught about courage, patience, and organisation. In our foundation, there are the greatest strengths. The anger at injustice that led to real changes in people's lives. The ability to bridge divides, trust each other, honour common vulnerability, that in essence is at the heart of the National Health Service. Our commitment to the equal status of every citizen and their capacity to live their life from within has led Labour to being at the forefront of the fight for civil liberties, religious freedom, gender and sexual equality. Labour was built in partnership with the trade unions, who more than any other institution resisted the turning of workers into commodities. And the renewal of that purpose is as necessary now in an era of volatile globalization. But this is a really, really important point that I want to emphasize to you. Our strengths are not only to be nurtured because they are good, but also because they're the only way we confront our weaknesses. If we don't address them, we will not serve people as we should. The number of seats that we won on the 6th of May concealed the decline in our support. We got, essentially, a 1983 share of the vote or less, but we got a 1992 share of the seats. We mustn't hide from that. This is a serious and historic moment, and the choice that we make will now define our possibilities for a generation. We need to be clear about the historic weaknesses that compete with our great strengths, and sometimes, as on May the 6th, overcame them. There are three that I want to highlight. First, a shared creed that is too unclear or too undefined. The lack of an ideology that can unite our movement. In the good times, it doesn't actually matter. In fact, it might be a strength that we don't have that. Labour is a broad church, socialists and social democrats, Methodists and Marxists, idealists and revisionists. But when historic choices need to be made, that lack of a shared creed can be a weakness. Some of you may remember the name of Richard Tawney, R.H. Tawney. He wrote an essay, The Choice Before the Labour Party, as a response to our defeat in the 1931 general election. It bears very, very close reading today. Tawney rests his argument on the idea that we lost in 1931 was we lacked a creed that could unite the party in sustained democratic action. His definition of that creed is incredibly simple. He wrote that it's based, quote, not on transcendental doctrines or rigid formulae, but a common view of the life proper to human beings and of the steps required at any moment more nearly to attain it. A life proper to human beings. That was his shared creed. He argued that Labour lost its strategic power to engage opponents and build alliances, to prioritise, was it lacked a cause. He then wrote this about the 1931 defeat, and I want you to think about it in respect of the defeat that we've just suffered in 2010. He wrote, quote, because when Labour ought to have called people to a long and arduous struggle, it too often did the opposite. It courted them with hopes of cheaply won benefits. And if it did not despise them, sometimes addressed them as though it did.